Now, if we're all ready, I would like to introduce you to tonight's speaker. Dr. Rebecca Rennell manages the Uist Virtual Archaeology Project. She is an archaeology lecturer with the University of the Highlands and Islands. Her research interests include Scotland's later prehistoric landscapes, the Hebridean Iron Age, digital methods for landscape archaeology, and digital heritage interpretation. Tonight, she will speak to us about the award-winning project, Uist Unearthed. Dr. Rennell, if you're ready.
I am. Thank you very much, Jeanette. Hi, everyone. Yes, first of all, I'd like to say thanks so much to everyone at CBA and the CBA team who've set all this up and invited me to talk this evening. Yes, my name's Becky Rennell. I was going to introduce myself, but Jeanette's given a lovely introduction, so I probably don't need to do that. But what I will say is that I work for the University of the Highlands and Islands, and I'm based in South Uist in the Outer Hebrides. What I'm going to talk to you about is the virtual archaeology project that we've been engaged in, and I'm delivering this presentation on behalf of myself and my colleague Emily Gow, who can't be here today because she's in somewhere very beautiful, having a holiday. So good for her. But importantly, this project was also run in partnership with our local authority, that's with the Corlia, Nanel and Shear. So thanks also to them. So today, what I really want to talk about is how we set out to bring archaeology and the wider archaeological landscape back to our local communities using a variety of digital tools. But I'm also then going to go on to discuss some of the issues that we grappled with when we came to digitally visualizing Hebridean prehistory. I'm going to talk about how we created some of the content in the project. I'm going to talk specifically about co-production with a range of audiences and stakeholders. And finally, I'm going to reflect a little bit on feedback and wider impacts of the project. So to begin, I've just got a gratuitous picture here of a beautiful beach in Uist, just for a bit of context, and also to say that this is the beach near to where we work, and it's an absolutely gorgeous day today, and that's a very real representation of what we see out the window. Not always, but it is today. So for those of you who don't know where I am, I live in Uist and I work in Uist, and this is a chain of islands, part of the Outer Hebridean archipelago on Scotland's west coast. And Uist is home to absolutely amazing archaeology. We've got sites of national and international significance, from things like the well-preserved Neolithic tomb at Barbalangus on this slide here, to the Bronze Age mummified remains, which we'll hear a little bit more about as I go on. However, all this amazing archaeology, but we face a number of challenges when it comes to communicating this, and crucially, some challenges with regard to who and how we communicate it. First, it's really important to say that we have an absolutely amazing resource. Really well published work, notably the collaboration between the universities of Cardiff and Sheffield universities, the Search Project. This produced decades of top quality archaeological research, and out of that came some really amazing stories. However, despite all this fantastic research, most of Uist's archaeological resources were quite poorly understood by local communities, and they were quite poorly communicated to the wider public. Much of this information is buried in academic monographs, so for many of our audiences, this renders it quite inaccessible. The richness of our archaeological remains in Uist is in part testament to the exceptional preservation of some of our environments. So we've got this fantastic area on the west coast, the free draining alkaline shell sands of the west coast, which is known as the Macha. This is it in bloom, absolutely stunning. And this preserves archaeological remains particularly well. But then we've also got the waterlogged peat deposits that dominate the island interior and out towards the east coast. But although we've got really good preservation, we've got very few upstanding and visually impressive archaeological sites. Most of them are concealed beneath layers of sand or some of these deep deposits of peat. In addition to that, we've got quite limited tourist infrastructure in the islands. We've got only a handful of sites furnished with any form of interpretation and very minimal signposting. So what we're looking at here on the left there is the faded signage at Cloughallen from the 90s, immediately after the excavation. were knocked over by some cows and have never quite recovered. And on the right here, what I believe to be 1970s traditional historic Scotland embossed metal signage from Dún Torquil, another fab site, with what we probably consider to be rather outdated interpretations of a Baroque site. But perhaps even more interesting is that this sign is covered, usually covered with heather. And whenever I go out to this site, I sort of reveal it again. Just an example of what our signage and our infrastructure looks like. We also have fragile landscapes. We live in coastal climate here, places where physical interventions such as visitor centres or reconstruction, perhaps even roads and permanent signage can be really problematic. It can be costly and it can be maintenance heavy. The pictures here showing one of our many large eroding prehistoric middens, material just falling into the sea on a regular basis. And on the right there, part of the Hebridean Way, which is an established walkway where the signage is just eroding into the sea. So this, as you can probably imagine, presents us with some additional challenges for developing heritage infrastructure, for developing interpretation and any accompanying facilities. And the point that I really want to emphasize is that landscape and environment are really key here. Landscape and environment provide the opportunity for all this fantastic research, all that fantastic preservation, but they also are often the reasons that it's relatively invisible and establish many of the challenges for creating kind of permanent heritage tourism. Another challenge that may be familiar to a lot of you is about audiences. We really wanted to reach out to new audiences. Specifically, we wanted to reach out to our communities. We've got two broad audiences that we were dealing with. We've got our local communities and we have the visitor audience. From on the community side, we wanted to reach those young people and young families, people who tend to think that archaeology isn't for them. We noticed that historically that archaeology and archaeologists working in Uist have engaged predominantly with quite a specific demographic, probably defined or most identifiable, albeit rather crudely, as the retired professional incomer. This articulates with wider structural issues. I'm sure it'll be familiar to many of you who work in rural communities. I think it's also an issue for the wider archaeological discipline. But what we observed was that that in the past, archaeology had been disseminated in rather traditional formats, so through monographs and the occasional evening talk. And we thought we could go beyond that and reach new audiences. So this was our challenge. How do we reach a more diverse group of people from within Uist community? But secondly, for our visitor audiences, how to convey that significance of our archaeological heritage when there's so little to see on the ground. So we have these dynamic sands across the Uist extensive Maca plain that I've talked about. And on the Maca, there are all these subtle clues to what were these really densely populated landscapes. Similarly, if you walk out into the hills and into these moorland lochen areas, and you interrogate that moorland loch area, there are hints at much wider landscape exploitation. So to the trained eye, it's easy, I feel, to imagine this busy, noisy Maca of the past and these hidden abandoned islet sites as being centres of power and deep cultural significance. And it's this view of Uist past that we really wanted to bring to wider audiences. And this is particularly relevant to visitors because that view of busy, populated is for a lot of people, it's at odds with that perception of the Hebrides as being remote and edge of the world. But how could we do this? How could we enhance people's view of the archaeological landscape and successfully engage them in Uist archaeology with all of these challenges? But more than that, how could we create academically rigorous resources that convey all these really complex archaeological processes and at the same time support sustainable tourism that brings economic and social benefits to our islands? When I read all of that out, it makes me think that we possibly bit off more than we could chew. It was quite a tall order. But our response was to look to digital reconstruction, to explore how digital tools could help us to reconstruct archaeological sites, but also how we could work collaboratively with our local council, with other researchers, but most importantly, alongside our local communities. From the outset, and this at the time was deemed quite a controversial aspect of the project, but we were absolutely convinced that to be meaningful and to have really lasting impact, digital reconstructions needed to be linked to the sites themselves, to the places. So what we wanted was for archaeological information to be contextualized by the physical locale, and to encourage people not just to engage in the archaeology, but in the wider archaeological landscape. So to achieve this, we explored place-based augmented reality, AR, or augmented reality tools that enabled users to launch life-size reconstructions of buildings that then superimposed onto the real landscape. It's quite a hard thing to explain, I realise, when you haven't ever used augmented reality before. So I'll try, but if you haven't, you might need to have a go to really get what I'm talking about. But that was where we went in terms of our methodology. And after lots of back and forth on the name, Uist Unearthed was born. The whole process of naming the site the project was far less enjoyable than I had anticipated. I thought it'd be really fun, but actually it was extremely difficult. But finally, Uist Unearthed was born, and we now all love that name, so that's good. So Uist Unearthed is a mobile app with augmented reality or AR reconstructions of 5 archaeological sites that all sit on the Hebridean Way, which is existing infrastructure for visitors. It's a cycling and walking route. And then to support this, we also created a touring multimedia exhibition. Here you can see the location of those 5 sites. So we start off at the south, in South Uist, with the Bronze Age Roundhouse at Hallen, the Iron Age Wheelhouse at Kildonan, the Norse Longhouse at Bornish, the Iron Age Broch at Dún Torquil, so that's up in North Uist, and finally the medieval hall at Dún an Stica. Our project traces 2 stories, really, 2 landscape stories, one of living on the Macha and one of living on the water. Really importantly, our reconstructions are all location triggered, and that means that users can only access the full app content when they visit the site. You have to come to Uist to use it. I'm going to try and show you a little bit of how this works as an example. So this is Hallen again. I keep coming back to this example because it was really the site that sparked off the whole idea for this project. So Hallen is this Bronze Age site, internationally significant, famed for the discovery of mummified human remains. And this is how it looks today on the left-hand side. Those are those faded panels that were on small little podiums, but the cows knocked them over about 8 years ago and they've never recovered. And you can see the footprint of the houses. And here on the right, you can see someone's pitched their tent right inside the shallow remains there. And already, hopefully, that image is screaming, there's an opportunity to do this better. There's a better, we could communicate this significance to the wider public, surely better than having people pitching tents right in the middle of it. So that's where we are. That was our starting point with that site. And here is Hallen reimagined through life-size AR through our app, triggered again at that site location. So when users scan, we've got a QR code, and each site you trigger the life-size reconstruction using the QR code, and it's all those models are informed by all this wonderful archaeological data. Then once you enter those life-size models, you can then start selecting trigger points, which present archaeological stories through different layers of multimedia. We used various different things, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But it includes things such as text, animation, 3D models, infographics. And again, all of this information is accessible within the Uist landscape. We then repurposed and reimagined many of the assets from the app in our touring exhibition. Some people felt it was rather unfair that we were insisting that you come to Uist to experience all of this. So the exhibition was an opportunity for us to bring some of that to wider audiences. We've displayed the exhibition at local venues in Uist and elsewhere in the Hebrides, but we've also taken it as far as the British Museum in London, the National Museum in Edinburgh, and Hollywood. So some really exciting venues. The exhibition comprised VR headsets where those AR models were repurposed and put into a headset, and also things like 3D printed artifacts, animations, and interactives. So hopefully I've given you a bit of an outline of the project, where we started, what our aims and objectives were, and what it looks like. I'd now like to share with you some of the processes that we went through and some of the things that we explored on the way. We've been really reflective in this project, and there are some things that certainly work better than others, and we've learned a huge amount. So visualizing Uist past, some of the challenges. So to begin with, authenticity was extremely important to us as archaeologists leading the project. And it was a central concern of ours at the beginning of the project. We worked with this fabulous digital design team called PLX, and I'm sure they, if you were to ask them, they will say that we were probably quite irritating at the beginning because we were so finicky about how everything had to be. We were obsessed with everything being as authentic as possible. That was our starting point. So our AR and our VR models were all based, all of them are based on detailed research material. 3 of our sites, as I've kind of alluded to, have been the subject of really detailed excavation from the search project, so Cardiff and Sheffield's hard work. Our models are based on the site plans and the phasing, where possible, comparative examples, and we created them in collaboration with members of the original excavation team. So here's Mike Parker-Pearson, for example, who excavated Hallen on the day that we launched the app, but was also involved in online discussions. So the pictures, the roof was going up and down as we kind of discussed it to death. So yeah, huge amounts of discussion on things like height of doors, pitch of roof, etc. The image here is showing you various stages of development for the Norse Longhouse at Bornish. What we discovered, however, was that there was a tension between our desire for what we perceive to be authentic from an archaeological point of view and creating a valuable experience for users. And this became quite clear after the first site that we worked on, which was Hallen. Again, shown here, the conjoined houses, sitting within the mapper at Dalborough in South Uist. As I've said, we trigger these models from within their landscape location. At the beginning of the project, we were adamant that they had to launch sort of centimetre accuracy. And part of the rationale for that, which I stand by, is the importance that we place on landscape and landscape location. It was really important. Likewise, we wanted all additional material to sit in exactly the location it was found. So, for example, if you come to Hallen, you launch our model, you'll be able to see the 3D model of the gold ring from Hallen, and you will be able to look at it in the exact location that it was found. But this obsession of mine with everything being in exactly the right location, this was so challenging for the digital design team. And although we eventually got the technology to play ball, we learned a huge amount from this initial experience. And so by the time we started working on our next site, which was the Iron Age site at Kildonan, we felt more comfortable about shifting the location slightly, a matter of meters. But we did this to ensure that the AR launch was more stable and the user experience was more consistent, which perhaps to some of you listening doesn't sound like a big deal, but I can tell you for myself and Emily, that was a real wrench away from our starting point. In response to user feedback, we did lots of beta testing with members of the community. And in response to some of the initial feedback after the first site launch, we decided to furnish the Iron Age house in our model much more completely, as you can see in this image. Again, another departure from our earlier position on authenticity over user experience. Another example here, this is the final textured interior of the Norse Longhouse at Bornish, which has actually become my favourite. I just love it. But if we compare this model with the first one, so the Bronze Age roundhouse at Hallen, by comparison, Hallen is quite empty. Where we couldn't be certain what it looked like, we left it blank. And we feel on reflection that user experience, especially our user feedback data, suggests that this had some impact on levels of immersion. It's a much more immersive experience when you go to Bornish because we've moved on slightly in terms of authenticity. Here's a bit more of a detailed picture of the roof within the longhouse. I particularly like this. We based this on the roof of a traditional thatched building that's still in use in South Uist, a type known as a black house or tie and do in the local vernacular. There are some really compelling links that those who know about black houses and Norse architecture will be very familiar with, compelling links of architectural links between these types of buildings. So we use this, again, a bit of a departure again from authenticity, but we wanted to really bring that texture in. So you can see, there we go, that's actually photographs from the building, and that's how we've used it to inform the roofing of our model. It's really, really important to us still, even though we learned and we moved on slightly, but it's really important that our models are based on archaeological data and that our visualizations are anchored to an archaeological understanding. But a flexible approach when weighed against the outputs and the impact was quite an important step for us. And I think it was a positive one. But very happy to hear alternative views on that. It's something we discuss quite a lot as a team. You might have noticed in some of the images I've shown, or if you've used any of our app or been to our exhibition, you'll notice that we don't include people. This was a really deliberate decision. Again, something we talked about, but both myself and Emily, who have led this project, were both in agreement on. We didn't want to include people. Firstly, it's an issue of authenticity again. For most of the sites that we're dealing with, we know very little, perhaps even nothing whatsoever about the clothing or the hairstyles of the people who would have been using these buildings. And we just weren't prepared to make that leap. But additionally, we reviewed quite a lot of VR visualizations of in other projects, of other prehistoric sites, and we felt that on balance, models of people appeared quite clunky, out of place, and they resulted quite negatively on our personally, and everyone will have a different view on this, I imagine, but they resulted quite negatively on levels of immersion for us. So we didn't want to include them. Furthermore, by peopling our models, we would have had to have made, again, this is back to authenticity, but we'd have to make decisions on gender, age, ethnicity, and we just didn't feel we could confidently assert any of those things about our sites. So perhaps another concession to authenticity. But most importantly, the deciding factor was really that the absolute beauty of location-based augmented reality is that the audience and the users, they populate these ancient sites and landscapes, and we really love that. And we've also found, this wasn't something that we had planned, but we found that selfies in the roundhouse have been really, really popular for sharing experiences on social media and getting that information out there. So we might not put people in our models, but we're definitely peopling these places, and that feels like a positive thing. As you might have noticed, we've used quite a lot of different types of media for telling different stories. We've explored various things, and some work better than other, and definitely some of the things we've used aren't for everybody, and I'm just going to discuss a few of them here. Animation. I never imagined in a million years that animation would be a major part of this project. But we realized we had an opportunity to create some really innovative and original presentations of complex, often inaccessible data, and animation seemed like the way to go. So here, for example, this is our team's first attempt at storyboarding. A lot of this, as you can probably tell, was developed through COVID lockdown time, so we're all online and sharing information. But here's our first attempt at storyboarding for the mummification process at Hallen. And then this is the final output. We worked with an animator. We've adopted a really stylistic approach. We wanted to find a way to tell a story about mummified human remains, about composite bodies, but that one was sensitive, to the portrayal of human remains. So we've left the people as sort of shadows, and we tried to keep it not too detailed and not too gory. But we also feel like using the stylistic approach and using some bright colors, we've kind of removed that authoritative voice and inviting our audience to visualize some of these scenarios for themselves. But I definitely think there's been mixed reception about our portrayal of these. Some people love it and other people are less keen. Another example of a different approach that we took, not digital in fact at all, but it's about exploring what works, was our mummified human remains game. So this is obviously directed at younger audiences and part of the exhibition, but it invites users to put the composite Hallen bodies back together using really brightly coloured magnetic pieces. And when they flip them over, it gives information about the radiocarbon dates and the parts of the body that were found and information about the excavation. We also experimented with how users visualize material. Let this clip play. So thinking about visualizing material and how we present material specifically to our audience in Uist is quite important. Because of where we are, it's unlikely that significant artifacts are ever going to be on display locally. And as you can imagine, that's quite a political topic. So in our app and in our exhibition, we've got lots of photogrammetry models of artifacts from sites that we then co-produce with members of our community. And the model you've just seen there is that's a 3D model, but then turned into an animation of the Ringerike cylinder, which is made of antler from the north side, from Bornish. And here we also printed the same artifact. So what we were able to do is to show people a 3D print, a 3D model, and then an animation, and ask people what works for them and what engages them the most. And the question I was also asking is, if you've got the option of these different digital approaches or the real artifact back, what would you like? And it's been fascinating to see how mixed the response was. You'll notice that our 3D printed artifacts are in silly colours. The Ringerike cylinder is not a sort of turquoise, but we did this again because we thought a lot about authenticity. These are not real objects, and we wanted to make it really clear. So we printed all our objects in kind of wacky colours. But we're really interested to understand and explore how people responded to the material. I found what was particularly interesting is that 3D printed objects were hugely popular. They don't work for me. I don't find them particularly engaging. The weighting is wrong, and I just can't. It doesn't work. But I think that I come from the privileged point of view where I've been able to hold artifacts lots in my life, and what I hadn't fully appreciated is how much just physically holding the tangible aspect of the printed artifacts, how much that really worked for particularly our younger audiences and how much it engaged them. So I've kind of alluded to bits of co-production, and I mentioned it at the beginning. So I want to talk in a bit more detail about how we actually did that and how we collaborated with various stakeholders. Co-production became a really important part of the project, and working with schools in particular was really important. It was very difficult because we started a project right at the beginning of lockdown, and so a lot of our plans had to be adjusted, but we still managed to do quite a lot of co-production work, which was great. We also did beta testing, as I've said. We were able to do lots of outside work in the first year, outdoors, and that was quite good. But we had 50 members of our local community in just that first site launch, and they gave us really valuable feedback. And we also brought the app into our local schools and did work with them as well. We collaborated with the National Museum in Scotland, so in Edinburgh, NMS, with also our local archaeology group, the UCAG, and with local historical societies in a series of workshops that were based around the finds assemblage from Iron Age Kildonans. That's one of our sites. That assemblage is with the National Museum, and we arranged for part of the assemblage to be brought over to Uist, and there were two elements: finds handling, and then the creation of 3D photogrammetry models. So the models, as you can see, we did here. So key outputs from this were the models themselves, which were part of the touring exhibition. You can see here again, silly colours, bright pink version of a pot decorating tool from the Kildonan assemblage, and then the real artifact there on the right. So this was really successful, we felt. And through this collaboration, the participants and ourselves, importantly, we all developed some really tangible digital skills that were really useful, while also directly creating content for the project. And as I said, the assemblage is in possession of the National Museum, so it was a really good opportunity to increase and facilitate access to an assemblage that otherwise would not be in Uist. And I think it's another example of where we were able, through this project, to bring knowledge kind of out of textbooks, out of archives, out of museums, and into a more accessible format. Another aspect of the project was the opportunity to embed Gaelic language in a sensitive and innovative way throughout all the outputs. Gaelic is the language of our region. It has a fundamental role in the effective interpretation of the archaeological landscape of the Hebrides. However, we argue that it's rarely been used as a medium for communication for archaeological data, or perhaps more importantly, it's not fully recognised in archaeology as the rich research resource that it is in its own right. So here, again, another part of our collaboration, we collaborated with Uist Unearthed, which is a Uist-based Gaelic arts and music organisation. They were fantastic to work with. They ensured that all our content is bilingual, and you can toggle between the Gaelic and the English. But we didn't want to just have verbatim translations. We wanted to have something a bit more. So we commissioned Uist to create some bespoke Gaelic content that reflected on each of our sites, reflecting on aspects of landscape, place, and culture through stories, poetry, and song. These are told by Gaelic speakers. People here have a huge amount of expertise and knowledge on folklore, history, language, and we wanted to build this in as much as possible. An output of the project that was completely a surprise to us was that we've been told that Gaelic learners are using our app for their to learn Gaelic, because there is a shortage of material apparently, and the ease with which you can toggle between the English and the Gaelic has meant that it's become a resource for Gaelic learners, which is fabulous, and again completely unintended. In this picture here, you can see one of our 2 storytelling events that we ran. Although we are working digitally, we don't forget, we never want to forget that it's actually all about people. So each of these events took place at one of our augmented reality sites. As well as exploring the app, participants got the chance to listen to stories in both Gaelic and English relating to this place. So here you can see the local crofter, that's Donald MacDonald. The Viking site of Bornish is actually on his croft, and here he's telling people all about the site from his perspective. So, the result is that we've got other people's voices, not just archaeologists, not that or just that authoritative voice, but highlighting the significance of the site, its meaning to people locally, and using Gaelic as an important medium of communication in its own right. Now, I'm at 32 minutes, and I think I've got time to play this, because this is one of our my favourite example. So to continue bringing in more Uist voices, we work with on our local schools. This is the local primary school in North Uist. They're telling a story here about Hugh MacDonald, who's an infamous inhabitant of a medieval site called Dunastika. So one of our sites we've created the augmented reality experience for, and then we wanted to build in some additional information. And there was a huge amount of Gaelic oral history and folklore surrounding the site. So at this point, we'd seen that animation prove for at least some of our audiences to be a really successful method of communication. We want to continue doing this kind of thing and exploring it. And the kids at the school really rose to the challenge. So the children developed a storyboard, they developed a script, and they recorded all of their own voiceovers in Gaelic and English. And the result is, again, that we're drawing on Gaelic, we're drawing on local stories and local talent. But what was so lovely about this is that our animator took all of the drawings that the kids did. We thought that our animator, Rachel, was going to sort of riff on it a bit and create her own thing based on their ideas. But actually what she did was she animated their actual drawings. So every child's work is features in this animation. And when it was presented to them, the final output, which they asked to watch 6 times over, everyone was squealing, oh, that's my picture, that's fantastic. So I'm just going to, if I can, show you this animation. It's just a few minutes.
This is the tale of downfall of Hugh MacDonald of Dun and Stika, North Uist.
He was desperate to become chief of the clan MacDonald, so he hatched an evil plan to kill his uncle and clan chief Donald Gorham.
He wrote 2 letters, one to William Martin, Donald's tenant, asking for help, and the other to Donald, full of flattery and compliments. In a terrible twist of fate, Hugh's letters were swapped. Furious, Donald ordered his relative to capture Hugh. Hugh saw the men approaching. With no time to escape, he dressed in women's clothing and pretended to grind the corn. Not fooled by his disguise, the men attacked. Hugh was marched into Duntelm Castle in Skye and locked in the dungeon.
Tortured and thirsty from a diet of salt beef and salt water, he could survive no longer, and that was the end of Hugh MacDonald.
So hopefully you all enjoyed that. Every time I watch it, I find something else in it that I love. I just think the kids have got such a great sense of humour as well. But we were also, not only do we love it, but the animation was shortlisted for a Film G award. And then we sent some of the children from the local school and they represented us in the project at the Film G event in Glasgow, which was really, really great. So to conclude that section, really, our work with schools has been so important and working with our local kids. What's been particularly important has been that we've gained the wider support for the project through this work, which wasn't necessarily why we did it. But what we found that kids were bugging their parents to take them out on days out, asking them to take them to the museum, asking them to get the app downloaded on their phones. And it makes such a good shared experience. And we're finding that the schools are using it for school trips. So I'm just going to finish now in the last few minutes with just some initial thoughts on feedback and impact. The project has directly engaged more than 11,000 people, which is immense when you consider the population of our island. That's about 4 times it. 11,000 people via the app or the exhibition or through one of our engagement events or pop-up events. Just summarising some of those here. 221 school pupils have worked with us, 273 members of the community, 2,100 people through engagement events. Our app downloads there are slightly outdated because I just checked it this morning and we now have over 4,000. Those keep going up and 4,800 people have visited our exhibition. We're continuing to evaluate the project. There's still, we feel, loads more that we can tease out about the impact of our work, but we do have some initial thoughts. We keep asking this question, what does successful impact look like? See, for us, it's not, although we will, we're very delighted that there's lots of downloads, but it's not merely downloads or clicks. For us, success looks like establishing active, long-lasting engagement that actually changes what people do and how they think about the past. Rather than passive short-term engagement. So it's how do we actually get to that? How do we understand that process? What we can say is that our evaluation so far indicates that 90% of users learned something new about Uist archaeology. We can say that 81% said they visit another archaeological site now that they've used our app. 40% said they'd learned something about Gaelic, and 88% recommended using the app or visiting the exhibition to others. The kind of free text feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. People praise the fact that it leaves no trace. That seems to be very important to people. People say they've learned things, they find it immersive, it brings the archaeology to life. Most impressive in feedback seems to be the life-size AR structures. That seems to really hit home with people. And that's even before they realise that there are points of interest within it. The family that said the app prompted their children to imaginative play after using the app. This is perhaps one of our most valuable pieces of feedback today. We absolutely love this. We almost cried when we read that. That's just what we wanted. But it reminds us again of that question, what does successful impact look like? And perhaps most importantly, what happens after people use the app or visit our exhibition? There's been a huge amount of community goodwill and support for this project, and I think it's a testament to the meaningful engagement that we've done. The project really sadly has come to an end, although we still get asked to bring the VR headsets out and we're still doing events because we love it. But what I think we're already seeing is more active engagement with our archaeological sites by an increasingly diverse audience group. By extending our exhibition and our workshops beyond more traditional spheres like the college or museums, we've taken it to festivals and community events. And I think by doing that, that's helped us capture some of the harder to reach demographics, kids and young adults in particular. Participation in the creation of content has led to a real sense of ownership over the project, with many of our young people and our kids effectively becoming ambassadors. They signpost people to it and they recommend the project to visitors, which is just wonderful. And so to conclude, I think what we're starting to see is a bit of a change in the relationship between archaeological knowledge and communities in Uist, one which has become more participative, collaborative and equitable, and quite importantly, is happening from within our islands. And these final photos really just summarise what the outcome we're most proud of, which is the next generation. In particular, I like to point out these two children who came to our exhibition 4 times, and in the final time they came dressed as Vikings, and they're just such delightful, wonderful kids. But yeah, the next generation who are more than just aware of the archaeology on their doorstep, they're actively engaged in it, they're really enthused by it, and hopefully they'll be the people shaping its development in the future. So that's really all I had to say. I'd just like to thank all our partners, our funders and our collaborators, and to do a big shout out for PLX, who are the digital design team, not only fantastic, professional, wonderful, creative people, but also immensely patient when we were in our very authentic phase. Yeah, wonderful. And just to say that if you haven't done so already, please download our app right now. It's available on for Android and Apple, and it's free. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this talk. I love this project, and it's been great to hear a bit of feedback since we last spoke, which was last November already. And we've got some really good questions coming in, and I just want to give people another second to pop their questions in the Q&A box, but also just kind of congratulate the team on this project. It's such tangible proof of the public benefit of just thinking outside of the box, right, of how to communicate with archaeology, and I find it thrilling. And in fact, one of the questions is about the ability to replicate this project elsewhere. How easy would it be for another group, maybe rural, maybe not, to take this idea and sort of make it their own? What would that process look like? Is it possible?
It's a really good question. We've been contacted by quite a lot of people over the last year, asking that question or something similar. And I think it's very possible from a technical point of view. I think the thing that we tried to emphasize when asked about other areas is I think it needs to be a response to the challenges in your area. I mean, where we are, the real challenge is that our archaeology is so invisible. We don't have upstanding remains. So if you're working in an area where that's a similar problem, I think these kind of tools are absolutely fantastic. And it's very possible to create something like this. And to replicate in other places. We're working on at the moment on the next phase of the project. I'll get that pitch in, which is to do something very similar with communities in Barrow and Harris. So those are the islands to the north and the south of us, who are quite keen, especially now that it's possible for us to show what we're talking about. You know, to start this project when we hadn't created anything like this before took a bit of leap of faith from some fantastic supporters at the beginning, but now we can say this is what we can do, and people are really keen to. So yeah, it's very possible to replicate this elsewhere.
And now that the project, this particular one, is over, is done, what does that mean for the app itself? How is that maintained?
That's a really, really good question. The maintenance is a really important part of the contract. It was quite difficult at the beginning of the project with the way the funding was structured. And I think that I believe there's been a bit of a learning curve with some of the funders as well about this. In most funding scenarios, you'll need to have spent all the money by the end of the project, but we all want to have the app working till 2030 was the requirement. So we've built in a maintenance contract with our digital design team, and legacy has been really important. We've got various different things set up so that if something happens with the app and we're not able to fix it, that all of those digital assets will be available in another format. But yes, I think I would urge anybody who engages in a project like this to make sure they've got a significant amount of budget set aside for maintenance, because the last thing we want is, having done all this work, is for phones to update and suddenly those apps don't work. It would be a nightmare.
Which leads to a few other questions on the technical side, because as archaeologists, speaking for myself, this sort of area might be a huge learning curve. So how did the team approach finding the right people to work with to create this?
That's well, we went through a really rigorous procurement process. We weren't aware of the team that we ended up working with. We weren't aware of PLX. We had a huge amount of interest in the tender, and the team we went with were the ones that had the level of expertise that we felt we required. And I think we're just delighted to work with them, such a creative group of people, and also hugely patient, because I mean, this is a warning, if anyone asks me a very technical question, I'm probably not going to be able to answer it, but we work with experts who deal with that side of things and are really good at communicating these quite tricky technical aspects to, you know, in layman's terms for us.
I'm just catching up with some of the questions to make sure that I don't miss anything. But my own question is, what I'm quite curious about is the initial tension that you were discussing about authenticity and user experience. What was the sort of some of those major points of hindrance for the user experience when you were talking about, you know, making sure that the location was exact? How was that a challenge for the visitor?
But well, for the visitor or for the digital design team, maybe
Whichever.
Yeah, well, I think that the challenge there, the difficulty, is that augmented reality technology isn't quite there to do the thing that we asked it to. We've absolutely pushed the technology to its limit. I think give it another 5 years and getting models to sit in exactly the right location will be relatively easy. But for now,
Right.
It's really challenging. And our team came up with, if anyone has used the app, we actually have 2 different ways in which you can launch the app. One is lining up the QR code, and the other one is lining up a compass. And there's all different methods for trying to get them to sit in the right place. When we first, I think it was 2 days before launching the app, whenever about 3 times out of 10, when we launched it, the models were coming in like they'd just been, it was disastrous. They would kind of look like someone had just dropped them into the ground, and they were sort of, or they were floating in the air. So it was really stressful. One of the challenges, according to our expert John, is that the very gently undulating landscape of the macha and blades of grass, the AR, in order to launch it, it needs to know where the ground surface is. But on a windy day, you'd get bits of marram grass which would sort of disrupt it, and then it thinks the ground surface is in a different place and it would launch it somewhere else. So just, you know, some of those challenges. If they don't launch in the right location, if it's floating in the air, people instantly switch off. It doesn't feel right. And we do still have a few stability issues, particularly with Hallam. But we've started to be a bit more relaxed about it, because what we know is that we are pushing the technology to its limit. We're trying to do something that hasn't quite been done before, and there's some risks with that. So you know, you have to balance those things out. We have more stable models. Some of the others are more stable, but we wanted to take some risks because we wanted to do something different.
And as you move on to the other islands, like Bada, for example, are there things that you're really excited to add now that you've done this one and you know how the technology works or doesn't? Are there dimensions of it that you're really excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a much better idea about what works and what's more tricky. But we're trying hard not to keep to fill our minds with sites that we could do this on, because what we'd like to do now that we can say to groups, this is possible, look at the kind of outputs we can create. We want to give people the option to say, well, which sites would you like us to work on? It's quite hard to stop thinking about it, because I keep thinking, oh, that site would work. Oh, no, it's not, because I don't want that decision to be ours. You know, we had to make that decision for this project because we were going out on a limb, really, and we hadn't done anything like this before. But now that we've got something solid that we can show people, I think it's kind of right and appropriate that we put that out to others and say, what do you want? What do you want enhanced? I think also, whilst anyone who's familiar with the Hebrides, the islands all have their individual characters. In Harris in particular, there are a lot more challenges around tourism. They've got a lot of tourists. Uist hasn't got the same issues. They have these pinch points where tourists are kind of getting all clogged up, and we don't want to add to those problems. So I think we need to think really carefully in Harris about how we have to make sure that it enhances. And also, we've got the opportunity to, as I say to people, which sites do you want? We took very much an archaeological viewpoint, and they were probably the kind of headline news in archaeology world, but they may not have been the sites that our community might have chosen if we'd have given them the option. So I'm really excited to take that slightly different approach where we give, we're not so much in control. Maybe we'll find that hard, but there's so many the Hebrides is it's just stunning for archaeological remains. Anywhere we go, we'll be able to work with something really exciting, I'm sure.
And which is, I think, is one of the best points about this project is that co-production, right? And that understanding of the vision, right? The mission, what you're trying to accomplish is to enhance people's experience with the archaeology, with the landscape. And that might require relinquishing some of that decision-making power, right?
Absolutely, it's hard.
And I've got an interesting question, and I wonder if there's any data on this, whether this project has led to wider engagement with archaeological sites on Uist that may not have been included in the app.
Well, yes, we have a bit of data on that. Again, we collected too much evaluation data, so we're still wading through it all. But that was one of the questions that we asked people was, had they visited archaeological other sites before, and would they now be interested in doing so? In the app, we also highlight some other key sites that, although we don't have augmented reality for, we tell people about them. So all we can say is that people intend to. We don't know if they actually do it, but the intention seems to be there that people will use the app, and then they say the stat is something like, so it's over 50% of people say they will go and visit another site. I can't quite remember exactly what it is, but it's a sizable proportion of people. But what I'd like to know is if they actually do. So what I'd really like to do is come back and interview some people, perhaps do some more evaluation work and get a sense of what the reality is. Because, we all might say we're going to go and do X, Y, and Z, but whether we do it or not is a different matter. And
another question, sorry, I'm just jumping straight into the other question because we only have 5 minutes left. And a couple of people have pointed out budget or funding. How were you able to secure this? Was it multiple sources? How long did it take to have enough money to get it all together?
Really good question. I think we were extremely lucky because there was a fund called the Natural Cultural Heritage Fund, which is administered by Nature Scotland, ERDF money. They were coming in at a 70% intervention rate. This was a project that I'd had the idea about for quite some time, but it was a bit of a pipe dream, really. And then this funding came out, and it felt like it was almost written for us. One of those times where you're not thinking, oh, how do we kind of make this? It was just, I was thinking, it went through all the things they wanted, and I thought, oh my goodness, we can do all of these things with bells on. This is great. It's written for us. So once we got that funding, we got 70% of the project funding. It was then a lot easier to go to our local council, to Heritage Lottery and others and say, look, we've already got 70% there. I think without that, taking a project that hadn't really been done before with people who've never really done this before would have been extremely hard. So we're hugely grateful to that. And now I'm finding, hopefully, with this next phase, because we've shown that we've got some expertise and experience, it'll hopefully be, fingers crossed, a wee bit easier. But that was the start.
And final question, putting you on the spot: do you speak Gaelic?
Ami Dulik Haniel Gaelic.
Am I to assume that's it?
And that is Gaelic for, I'm sorry, I don't speak Gaelic. No, I don't. I'm a supporter of Gaelic, and I just think we all have different things to contribute, and me learning the language is not my contribution, I'm afraid, but facilitating others and supporting it is my contribution.
And one of my favorite parts about the project is how people have taken to the bilingualism aspect of the app. And as someone who grew up bilingual, I really appreciate that, you know, just especially with languages that are endangered, right? Languages that have fought so hard to have their place recognized. I think it's absolutely fantastic what you guys have done on this project. And I want to thank you again for this talk and for this project and sharing all these ideas with us. And unless there's anything final that you'd like to share with us.
Well, first of all, just to say thank you so much. Lovely to see you again, and thank you for inviting me here. And also to say that we have got a project that we're working on in the meantime, which is our augmented reality book of Uist Unearthed. So keep your eyes open for that. We hope to have that out soonish.
That is fantastic. I'm glad I asked. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did. And just to let you know, this is archaeology session will happen next month, September 21st, a Thursday, I believe. And please check back with the CBA website for more details about that. And other than that, thank you again and have a great evening, everyone.